Hello everyone, welcome back to Workouts for Nerding. We're going to touch on a little bit of a strange topic today. We're not going to be talking specifically about workouts in general. What I'm going to be addressing today is something that a friend brought up, the biomechanics of different grips when using different bladed weapons. So, one of the sports I compete in is TSL, the Saber Legion, where we try to do combative with LED sabers. One of the common debates in this, because it's commonly used in the movie, is the efficacy of what's known as a reverse grip. I'm going to demonstrate a lot today with my synthetic longsword just because I find edge alignment easier to explain when we're using a bladed weapon. But the classic grip being something more like this, something in front of me, where a reverse grip comes down here. Reverse grip is extremely popular in movies for the rule of cool. Rule of cool being exactly what it sounds like. If it looks cool, let's do it. I will not argue that in choreography. This can be a very cool looking technique. And it can provide some really cool flow, which is, of course, the purpose of a movie, to create something flashy and engaging that people want to watch. Not necessarily what I enjoy watching, but it is something people like to watch. But because they see it in movies a lot, very often people will ask if this is something that I can work into TSL. And it's something that most of us who have some sort of martial arts background will generally discourage for a variety of reasons. Several of them being injury related, but also in the competition aspect, you are at a significant disadvantage. Now, I will never say don't have fun. If you enjoy doing these techniques and you happen to find them amusing and fun to do, and you can have enough success that you're enjoying yourself, that is fantastic. But if you're looking to become competitive in any way, or if you're a little bit worried about injury, which is more along where I end up, this is something that I would generally discourage, but I want to talk about why. So first off, I want to talk about the different functions of the wrist. The wrist actually does not have a whole lot of function in general when you actually look at the base mechanics of the muscles. We have wrist flexion, wrist extension, radial deviation, and ulnar deviation. By combining all four of those movements, I have one more movement called circumduction. These movements do combine and come into some of the more fine motor control aspects of tip control when we are trying to guide our blade to the correct point. However, the techniques that we actually use in most blade or stick fighting sports come more from the elbow and the shoulder. Things like a swing has a lot more to do with my elbow extension and shoulder flexion and protraction, while my wrist is guiding the motion. I am not using a whole lot of wrist action for my strength. Reason being, these are small muscles, and radial and ulnar deviation are not actually prime actions of those muscles. Now that's debatable depending on which textbook you read, so let's clarify what I mean there. The muscles that perform radial and ulnar deviation are actually also wrist extensors and flexors that happen to be working and firing in a different synergy pattern in order to make sure that we're getting these alternate motions. Fine motor control can make those more accurate, but very rarely are we going to get as much strength, and we're usually going to have our primary strength in our wrist come from flexion and extension motions. Which is why when you see someone take some of our classic fencing guards, they tend to have an alignment that actually places them in direct line here. Isn't fighting this way, it's fighting directly in this line here, where I have a little bit more stability and strength, just isometrically trying to keep me there. The reason that works with a sword in our classic grip is very simply because we're working with our body's alignment. This also is important in our defense, because depending on how we're positioning our arms for our blade, what we're trying to do in our defenses is, again, abuse that structure by placing ourselves in positions that allow us to get the most force generation possible so that we're not having to overwork against an incoming strike. Where I take issue with the use of reverse grip as a functional grip when we're using a long lever arm weapon is I am now taking a long lever arm against some of the weakest muscles, which creates a much higher risk of strain or sprain in those regions. Not a great idea. Alongside with that, I also am sacrificing my ability to make an efficient parry at the chest level. I'm now having to invert my grip in order to do so. This is now placing my shoulder at an extreme internal rotation, which of course, as you can imagine, places me at higher risk of injury at the shoulder as well. So not only am I placing my wrist in a position, I'm placing my shoulder in a bad place. And also because I'm putting a strange torque on my elbow, I also stand the risk of developing some issues at this lateral portion of the elbow, or, depending on how force is applied, even risking some injury to the collateral ligament on the ulnar side. In general, not things I would like to see or have to treat if people are able to. So in order to get an efficient parry along the midline, I want to be able to do it this way and not have to shift myself into a contorted position here. Now, of course, a more natural position would be something more like this. However, I'm not actually blocking much down here. Most of our classic manuals, when we're talking about how to block the legs, really talk about how you should clear your leg out of the way, and for a reason. It's faster and does not fight the lever arm action quite as much. Nice and simply, this is only defending a portion of my body I should not have to defend very often, but it is leaving me weaker when I try to come defend myself up top. The reason being, in order to defend off to this side of the body now, my lever arm here is actually in one of the weakest parts of my hand, an open grip, as opposed to the closed grip that it's working into here. So anytime I'm trying to block above my head, all of my strength is coming from the opposite side trying to lever up against it, which is not as efficient as I'd like it to be. Again, creating higher risk for strain and injury. The final reason that I'm not a huge proponent of this reverse grip is simply the range deficit that it creates when trying to reach forward. When you have any sort of elongated weapon, one of the most effective strikes you can have is a thrust moving forward into our opponent, and we're trying to maximize our range with that. When we look at competitive sports, they actually regulate the length of our blades for a reason. If I could have an infinite length blade, I would just stand on the opposite side of the ring and make the person work against that, and it would not be very fun to watch. But because we do have a maximum length in almost every single blade sport, you are at a disadvantage anytime you're fighting against somebody with a longer blade, so most of us will try to max that reach out, especially if we're trying to be more highly competitive. But I want to illustrate something to you guys here using my camera screen. If I walk this to the edge of my screen, which should be right about there, perfect. I am currently able to reach my wall actually right in front of me. However, if I reverse my grip, pulling myself into this comfortable position, you guys can see how far away that drops back. From my wall, I'm actually about 4 inches away. That'd be essentially like two of us fighting with equal length weapons and me coming into this and chopping 4 inches off of my blade and expecting that not to create a disadvantage. So, this versus this are two very different ranges at which I can fight, which means I'm also suffering a disadvantage on my offense, not just on the mechanical advantage of my defense. The one major advantage, if you call it that this type of grip would have is that it moves in unexpected ways, things people aren't necessarily used to seeing. However, that's the exact same advantage that a left-handed person has, in that their only advantage is that most people aren't used to fighting against it. However, a good combatant will have trained against different angles and people fighting with different hands, and this won't become much of an issue for someone who's more experienced. And so all the holes in the defense will be exposed by someone who has training against it. Very simply, the advantages of this is it surprises people. The disadvantages are numerous on the biomechanical level and the level of the offensive reach. It's not something I would generally encourage in terms of competitive sport or self-defense with a long-bladed weapon, although this is not a common self-defense weapon in general, but just as a thought. If you guys are trying to have fun, if you are just trying to do some choreography that you enjoy the look of, that's fantastic. However, keep in mind that this is not a grip that almost anyone would use functionally. If we're talking about a long-bladed weapon, especially in a competitive sport, it's not one I recommend. If you guys have questions or if you want to yell at me about this, please feel free to do so. However, the biomechanics of this one is fairly sound, and the reach disadvantage on this one is almost exactly empirical. You are about 4 inches short on my body in reach. If I am fighting myself and the only difference is that I have less reach, longer reach wins. So, all things being equal, play to your strengths, and play with every strength and advantage that you can if you are trying to win a bout. If you guys have other questions about other things, whether it's TSL related or fitness related, feel free to drop in comments or shoot me a message. I'm always happy to deal with some of the things that I don't think about because I take them for granted. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon.